Joining us right now is the DailyMail.com White House correspondent, Francesca Chambers. Francesca, good to see you. Thanks for joining the conversation this morning. What's your take on all of this? Gun reform legislation, will it pass? Are these the right moves, in your view, that the president should be focused on right now?
Well, Congress is out of session this week, Maria, so we'll be waiting to hear from lawmakers when they get back to Washington. But in their absence, the president and the White House yesterday made several moves in the direction of additional gun controls. You heard the president there talking about bump stocks. But at the White House press briefing yesterday, Sarah Sanders, the White House press secretary, said they had not closed the door to any specific gun control proposals. And that's what these listening sessions would be about. That would include stricter background checks and legislation in the Senate that the president has his eye on. That could also include an assault weapons ban. She was asked about that as well. And the White House press secretary also said that the president was directing his Health and Human Services Department to look at guidelines and additional rules that it could put in place that would potentially deal with mental health as well.
Yeah, the NRA has not commented on any of this just yet. They're going to wait.
They're waiting, and there's a lot of talk about the amount of money that is donated by the NRA for different political campaigns. But right. I think the big thing here, as I look at it, is I don't see what the positive case is on why somebody should be able to go out. I get Second Amendment right to bear arms, but someone to go out and own a machine gun, I think if you look at it from a sensible standpoint.
Machine guns are illegal in this country, and they have been since the 1930s. Tommy guns were illegal. We're talking about the difference between automatic and semi-automatic. Right. It is not legal for the average person in this country to own an automatic weapon. The only ones that are legal to exist were built before 1986.
Okay.
You said machine gun. Machine gun is not a semi-automatic weapon.
Semi-automatic.
I mean, nobody should be able to walk into a school and shoot kids that are sitting there with an automatic gun. That's my point.
It's not automatic. It's semi-automatic. And this is why the language is important.
A ton of bullets. Well, the language is important, but my point is nobody should be able to walk into a school and shoot tons of people in a matter of seconds.
Well, nobody thinks that murder is okay.
Automatic.
This is about the Second Amendment. Nobody thinks murdering children is okay.
My point was about the gun, the type of gun that was used.
Well, I'm trying to correct you because automatic weapons are not legal in this country, and they haven't been since the 1930s. Number one.
That's important.
And number two, the Democrats, where were they in the first 2 years of the Obama administration if they wanted to ban assault weapons?
If I could just finish a point then.
Please,
I don't
Mike,
think this is about Republicans or Democrats. It's not for me anyway. It's about people being safe in this country. So if you stand on Republicans this and Democrats this, then
that's what it comes down to.
Well, it doesn't for me. So, you can raise your voice and make it Republican versus Democrat, but I don't feel that way. I completely disagree with you.
Listen, I have to hear a lot of language used when talking about these weapons, and people don't know what they're talking about. This is a semi-automatic weapon, and there was an assault weapons ban. An assault, by the way, defined the cosmetic features of the weapon, not the caliber of it. It existed during the Clinton administration, and the Department of Justice let that assault weapons ban expire in 2004 because there was no hardcore evidence that it prevented extra violence in this country. That's the issue. And my point is, it's already illegal in this country to pass a background check if you are involuntarily committed to a mental institution or have been adjudicated by a court of law that you were mentally incompetent. The issue is, which President Trump is trying to fix, and John Cornyn and Chris Murphy in Connecticut, is the background check system fails time and again. It failed in the Texas shooting.
Why?
Because the Air Force didn't report a domestic violence conviction against the shooter in that incident, where he killed, I think it was 27 people. So the background check system is broken, and bump stocks, which do turn semi-automatic weapons into automatic weapons, Trump is trying to move to ban them.
By banning bump stocks.
To ban them. This was something, because a bump stock was used in the shooting in Las Vegas. And there was a lot of talk about banning them, and nobody moved to do anything. Now President Trump is trying to step up and make it happen.
Do you disagree with semi-automatics being available, legal? This is in the Constitution.
Gun expert, I think that whatever law can be passed to prevent someone from walking in and firing off massive amounts of bullets into a crowd anywhere, I'm for that. And I think it's way past Republican this, Democrat that. Whether you call it automatic, semi-automatic,
and I think we all agree with that,
no
by
one
the
should be
way.
able to walk into a school and shoot up a place.
But to Francesca's point, Francesca, there are a lot of laws on the books that are not being followed. The failures in the background check system that have allowed, like the shooter in Virginia Tech, he should have never have been allowed to purchase the handguns that killed all those kids. That's the point. That's what I'm trying to say is if we could fix the existing laws and systems, that would go a long way without having to basically put in place a blanket ban that would violate some individuals' constitutional rights.
Go ahead, Francesca.
And to your point about that legislation that Senator Cornyn and Chris Murphy have put forward, that is the legislation that the White House says that the president would potentially be willing to support. But they're not giving it a blanket endorsement because, as you have also noted on the panel, the language is going to be important. The White House wants to see what the final language of that bill would be before they give that their endorsement. So that's one thing there that I think we'll be keeping an eye on. It's not, it's not that the White House is fully endorsing that. And they haven't said, by the way, what they would be willing to endorse when it comes to these background checks and making them stricter.
Well, I mean, Nicholas Cruz was a known threat.
Yeah, he made a threat on YouTube. I mean, that
was a threat,
and he was identified to FBI. And this goes back to your NRA thing earlier. Last year, the House passed a bill that was supported by the NRA, President Trump, and the police that would tighten the restrictions on background checks. And so the House already passed that.
This is what John Cornyn and Chris Murphy are trying to do, but there was inserted into that bill in the House they wanted to put in a provision that required the reciprocity for owners of concealed firearm permits to carry them across state lines, something that we've talked about here.
Yes.
The Democrats opposed that reciprocity provision, so there was something else in that House bill. It wasn't as clean as the bill is in the Senate, just to be clear about that. But Maria, you raise an interesting issue that Cruz was a known threat. He'd been called to the parents had called the cops to the house.
Even his aunt.
Over 20 times. But again, it requires someone stepping up with a legal court order. So that court order is then put into the background check system. There are federal laws to prevent the mentally ill from getting guns, but it requires, this is what we were talking about, these gun violence restraining orders, a restraining order that would allow the parents, the guardians, or even the police department or local law prosecutors to take a gun away from somebody who might be a threat to someone else or even themselves.
So it's in the record.
But if he had never been tried and convicted, if he had never been found mentally incompetent by a court, if he'd never been involuntarily committed to a mental institution, there's nothing that would be in the national background check system for Nicholas Cruz.
So you're saying the background check has to change to include some of the issues that were obvious about Nicholas Cruz, even though a court did not deem him mentally challenged.
If the parents had stepped up and said, this child needs to be involuntarily committed to a mental institution, he would not have been allowed to buy a weapon.
Yeah.
It's up to the guardians and the local law enforcement to do something about it.
Francesca, final word from you. You think we're going to learn something from these listening sessions today?
I think that we will hear a lot from the students, but the question for me is, will we learn about more of the president's position on these weapons? Again, the White House staying very quiet yesterday, not really taking a strong position on any of the legislation, other than to say that they would support stricter background checks. So I think a lot of us are really curious to hear the president's thoughts on this.